But let's start more carefully looking at one of the other omni-properties, the property of omnipotence. What is it to be omnipotent? Now here there are two primary initial fundamental concerns about the doctrine of omnipotence. The first one is, what does omnipotence require? You start with the general notion that omnipotence has two parts to it, the omni part and the potency part. The potency part has to do with power, and the omni part is the universal quantifier. So it looks like perhaps you initially want to say, to be omnipotent is to have the power to do anything. Absolutely anything. Critics will then pop up with all sorts of interesting counterexamples. Well, to be omnipotent, do you have to be able to square a circle? Do you have to be able to make 2 + 2 = 5? Do you have to be able to do the impossible as well as the possible? That's the first issue. On this score, listen to what Aquinas has to say. He doesn't take very seriously this kind of criticism of the doctrine of omnipotence. He says this, and I quote, "It remains, therefore, that God is called omnipotent because he can do all things that are possible absolutely." Notice Aquinas doesn't think omnipotence requires being able to do what's impossible. Possibility and necessity can be used in many different ways. So, for example, you can't square a circle, 2 + 2 can't equal 5. That's one kind of necessity. No object can accelerate past the speed of light. That's another notion of necessity. Perhaps it's another notion, at least. I can't jump over the moon. Some people say they can't learn logic. All right, there's all sorts of uses of necessity. One of my favorites is administrative ease. I need some help. I want to be able to do this. I can't do this without having the following resources. And the dean says, I can't do that. And it's tempting to think all this means is the dean says, I won't do that. But saying I can't do that makes it sound more definitive. Other people say things like this: what you're asking me to do is break a promise, and I can't do that. Now, if you read that as a different kind of modality, the natural response is, of course you can. You have the capacity to do things that you shouldn't do. One of them is break a promise, so of course you can break a promise. But there's another interesting sense of modality on which it's perfectly reasonable for a person to say, you're asking me to break a promise and I can't do that. It's against my nature, it's contrary to my nature. Whatever this kind of modality is, it's a legitimate claim to make. So there are lots of interesting modal notions. Aquinas thought all modal notions bottomed out at a notion of necessity that is absolute. Every other kind of necessity is a relative kind of necessity. So maybe relativity to the laws of nature, maybe relative to the laws of morality, or decent human conduct, or personality character traits. Maybe there's relativity to laws of psychology, or human intelligence, or attention span deficit disorders, those sorts of things. Who knows? It doesn't really matter what to say about that. Aquinas can say, in the fundamental, most basic sort of possibility and impossibility, to say that God's omnipotent doesn't require that being be able to do stuff that is fundamentally incapable of being done, impossible to do. Okay, now that looks like a fairly decent starting point. Omnipotence doesn't require absurdities, except there are philosophers that disagree with Aquinas on this score. Perhaps Descartes is one of them. Listen to what Descartes says about omnipotence. Here's a quote. "The truths of mathematics were established by God and entirely depend on him as much as do all the rest of his creatures. You will be told that if God established these truths, he would be able to change them as a king does his laws, to which it is necessary to reply that this is correct." That is an astonishing quote. Just do 1 + 1 = 2. Let's keep it simple. 1 + 1 = 2. Does 1 + 1 have to equal 2? Could it have been 3? Well, it seems like the right answer is it has to be 2. It's not possible that it's 3. How do you make sense of that? And yet, God has established that 1 + 1 = 2. That's what Descartes maintains. Notice that Descartes maintains that for something to depend on God, to be true in virtue of something about God, is for it to depend on God's will, and God's will is free. So God chose to make 1 + 1 = 2 and to make this be what Descartes calls an eternal truth. It looks like what Descartes means by an eternal truth is a necessary truth. So God made it true and necessarily true that 1 + 1 = 2, but he could have chosen differently. How do you understand that? Perhaps what Descartes is committed to is the following idea. 1 + 1 = 2 is a necessary truth, but it didn't have to be. If we represent that claim, that conjunction, the second conjunct is, it's not necessary that it's necessary that 1 + 1 = 2, even though it is, in fact, necessary that 1 + 1 = 2. So what we're dealing with here, perhaps, are iterated modalities. Iterated operators at the front of a sentence. In this case, the sentence that has the operators in front of them is the sentence 1 + 1 = 2. If an eternal truth is a necessary truth, then Descartes is committed to the following. It's necessary that 1 + 1 = 2. But in the quote I just read, Descartes also affirms that God could change these rules, in which case it's not necessary that it's necessary that 1 + 1 = 2. If you find this perplexing, join the crowd. Perhaps if you find it perplexing, it shows that you have thought a little bit about modal logic.